the contact facility management software.
Okay, yeah, that'll be great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh yeah. What not? Sorry? Okay. No, men should open with. Yeah, I don't open with
The government designate has promised continuity in steering the country to financial.
Okay, it's not too bad. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, class. Good afternoon, everybody. You can settle down. So few of you, are you writing a test tonight? Tomorrow, okay. Well, welcome to the people at home. There's 5 people watching via the live streaming. They logged in, I can see. Just an announcement. Those of you who participated in the live streaming last semester with Mr. Burrows, or those of you who are, specifically those of you who participated last semester, the Center for Learning and Teaching would like to interview you next week, and they will be sending you an email with time slots. Okay, so on to today's work. We're continuing with the Reserve Bank. Somebody did ask me yesterday about the calculation that you were supposed to do for homework, and then we would have discussed it on Tuesday. So I said I'd do it today, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to email the solution to you, and then I will also just, at the start of Tuesday's lecture, just briefly go over that with you. Okay, so just some announcements, no tutorials next week. Then I'm going to put 2 videos on SunLearn, and the videos are for, it's about money and what money is, short videos that I made myself. It's not actually a video, screencast, similar to the inflation ones you saw before. And then one on South African Reserve Bank instruments. Okay, before we go on with the Reserve Bank, which we started on yesterday, I just want to show 2 videos, short videos, about our Reserve Bank governor, and then back to the election notes.
The government designate has promised continuity in steering the country to financial stability, accepts the job as a very difficult one. This promise to deliver as expected.
I am humbled and I am truly honored that the leadership of the country had found that I would be suitable to execute this mammoth task. I shall not disappoint. Been there, seen it before. Looks like whenever there is a difficult task that the government has to assign in finance and in economics, I get called upon. I've got no doubt, Mr. President, that eyes will also be on me, and I'm saying to you that I will not disappoint.
Now take a look at the new Reserve Bank governor's professional profile.
The sector Khanyago has come a long way from the dusty streets of Alexandra in Johannesburg to the heights of corporate and government finance. Born on the 7th of October 1965, Khanyago went on to obtain a bachelor's degree in economics from UNISA in 1991. That was followed by a master's degree in economics from the University of London. He then had a brief stint working as a clerk at FNB before joining the National Treasury as International Commercial Financial Director. 2 years later, he was promoted to the position of Chief Director of Liability Management. A few years later, he was promoted to Deputy Director General and went on to become the Director General of the National Treasury in 2004, becoming the then Finance Minister Trevor Manuel's right-hand man. Manuel's successor in 2009, Praveen Gordon, kept Khanyago on as Director General for 3 years before he left to assume the position as the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank. Khanyago is held in high regard in business and finance circles. His appointment as the new governor of the Reserve Bank is seen by many as a natural selection. It's the first time in the past 25 years that someone from within the Reserve Bank has been promoted to head the institution. His new role could prove his toughest challenge yet.
So the reason I showed you that video, very short, I just wanted you to have an idea of his background, that he did study economics, where he worked before, just so that you have an idea as to a bit more about our governor. Then the next video I'm going to show you, before we go to the slides, it is just on various political opinions when he was appointed. Okay, and then we'll get back to the work.
Segment of Mr. Khanyago as the new Reserve Bank governor has largely been welcomed across the political, business and labour spectrum.
No surprise. I think Lesecha is an excellent appointment. His history and treasury holds him in good stead. He's been deputy governor for a couple of years, holds him in good stead. I think he understands the banking industry. I think he understands the broader socio-economic content in which we need to work. So I think it's an excellent appointment.
It seems like it's a seamless handover and we should support him. He's a capable technocrat and I'm confident that he will coordinate the issues of economy, both the state as well as private.
He's got a wealth of experience to drive that institution. And I think we're looking forward that we're not taking someone who will spend time to learn. And I think that centered in terms of stability for investors in this country are very important.
I think this is a very good choice. Balanced, and I think we can rely on judgments that will have been checked all around. Plus, of course, obviously with the team around him, I think he must do well.
We hope that his appointment will be an opportunity for a complete.
I just want to pause this. I want you to note, this is a spokesperson for COSATU. You all know COSATU, the union. And I just want you to take note of what he's saying, because I'm going to refer to that afterwards.
Change in the policy adopted by the Reserve Bank, adopted by the opportunity for a complete change at his appointment.
That's of course obviously.
We hope that his appointment will be an opportunity for a complete change in the policy adopted by the Reserve Bank, of which COSATU has been very, very critical for many years.
Khanyago could be faced with a soft currency and inflationary implications thereof at a time when economic growth is very weak. And so the dilemma that he will face is how far to raise interest rates in the face of economic weakness in order to dampen inflation.
Okay, so specifically what I mentioned to you about COSATU, listening to that, is that COSATU is generally anti what the Reserve Bank does. The Reserve Bank's main function is price stability. So the Reserve Bank is responsible for monetary policy in South Africa. They are not responsible for economic growth or any of the other macroeconomic objectives. Do you hear that weird sound? Okay. So they're not responsible for the other macro. I mean, seriously. Let's hope. Okay. So they're not responsible for the other macroeconomic objectives, although balance of payment stability and exchange rate stability could also be seen as their function, which you will do that with Mrs. Nivot in the last term, but that is not something they focus on because they've made a decision. The monetary policy framework in South Africa is inflation targeting. So the Reserve Bank is responsible for inflation targeting in South Africa, and that is their goal. So the reason they come under fire by COSATU is that the Reserve Bank watches inflation. So inflation targeting is forward-looking. Monetary policy is forward-looking. So they need to think about what is going to happen a few months down the line, and they need to act on that now because there are lags in policy implications. So remember when we did inflation and PPI, I said, I think we did do it, that PPI is a leading indicator for CPI. Do you remember that? That people watch, or economists watch what's happening to PPI to see what's happening to CPI. So if the Reserve Bank sees that prices are going to rise, what they do is they will change interest rates, or they will, let's say they worry that inflation is too high, or it's going to become too high. They will then increase interest rates to put downward pressure on inflation. So why do you think they would increase interest rates? What is the link between interest rates and inflation, or interest rates and consumption? Anybody? If you remember for your micro, we haven't done aggregate demand yet, but if you remember for your microeconomics, when there's an increase in demand for products, that puts upward pressure on the price of that good. Likewise, in the total production or in the national economy, if people are buying a lot, if there's a lot of consumption expenditure, then prices are going to go up. So what the Reserve Bank does is they increase interest rates, hoping that consumers will spend less. So spend less using their credit card, because buying on credit card now becomes more expensive, just spending less. So the Reserve Bank's mandate is price stability. That is their goal. Now, not all reserve banks or central banks in the world target inflation. Some target the money supply, some target the exchange rate, but in South Africa, the monetary policy framework is inflation targeting. So remember that. And the reason COSATU doesn't like that is they would like the Reserve Bank to focus more on, to not be so concerned with prices, but maybe look at economic growth as well, and not to increase interest rates, because they feel that that affects the poor when interest rates are going up, because your mortgage payment becomes more, or buying on credit becomes harder or more expensive when the interest rate goes up. But you need to understand that the Reserve Bank has to take that criticism, because their mandate is inflation targeting, and that is what the monetary policy framework is in South Africa. Economic growth is more on the Ministry of Finance side, so we're looking at the National Treasury, etc. So we already know who our governor is. Remember this, don't forget it, it's not Jill Marcus. I am going to put this as a question in the test, so remember who our governor is. I've showed you 2 videos now, so you shouldn't forget. Then central banks, they haven't been around forever. It was a concept developed in the 1700s. Other names you'll see is central bank. Sometimes they call it Reserve Bank or National Bank. So Japan or England will be the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. You know, America is known as the Federal Reserve Bank, not the Federal Reserve System, so also known as the Fed, or the central bank, and then we are called Reserve Bank. So yesterday, in yesterday's exercise, you had to find these names. I didn't have People's Bank of China. I did have the ECB though, and the Fed, as well as the Bank of Japan. So these are just very important players in world markets, because central banks have a lot of influence. When interest rates change, and you'll do this with Mrs. Nivote in the last quarter, it affects exchange rates as well. Okay, but more about that later. So the one thing I did also want to mention was, when our current governor was appointed, was that when this was announced, it was announced in October, and then he took over on the 8th of November from Jill Marcus. But when President Zuma announced that Mr. Kganyago was taking over as the new governor for the Reserve Bank, the rand actually strengthened. And that showed that international investors and foreigners, they were confident in the decision taken. And one of the reasons for that is, you would see in the video, someone said it is a seamless appointment. Somebody else said you don't have to teach someone new things. And this is because he was working as the deputy governor for a number of years. So he was already Jill Marcus' second or right hand. And so he was very familiar with it. And I mention this because sometimes when we look at political appointments, we think, you know, the president just, it's cronyism, he's just, or nepotism, he's just appointing anyone. And yes, the reality is some of our ministers aren't that educated or knowledgeable or appropriate, but our current governor is well suited to the job. So keep that in mind. How old is the South African Reserve Bank? It was established in 1921. I could, if I was mean, ask you that as a multiple choice question. So remember that period, 1921. That was when the Reserve Bank was established. It is privately owned. Remember, you had that yesterday in the exercise. So it is owned by shareholders. It is not owned by the government. Also, when you go to the Reserve Bank website, what you will notice is, it is not .gov, it is .coza. So it's .co.za because it is privately owned. It is not a government, it's not owned by the government. The independence, as I said yesterday already in the lab, it's guaranteed by the Constitution. So it is independent, and that is just to protect the financial sector in South Africa and to protect the value of the rand. We do not want the president to be able to see, or any politicians to be able to say, just increase the money supply, increase the interest rate. No, it needs to be done independently. Okay, so two things though. At the bottom you see in bold, instrument independence and goal independence. So the South African Reserve Bank has instrument independence. What that means is they choose what to do in the day-to-day activities to reach the goal of inflation targeting or keeping it between 3 to 6% of CPI, not PPI. Remember yesterday we had PPI and that made it false? So they are instrumentally independent. But the goal of inflation targeting, and more about that in a few slides, the goal of inflation targeting was determined by the government. The Minister of Finance, this was back in 2000, and Trevor Manuel was still the minister. So what you need to understand is the goal of inflation targeting was determined by the government, but so SARB is not goal independent. They can't, for example, decide now, tomorrow, we are no longer going to target the inflation rate, we are going to target the exchange rate. We're about making the rand stronger or weaker. No, that mandate comes from the government, but they determine what instruments they're going to use, when they're going to change the interest rate, etc. That does not come from the government, and that's important. Most central banks are independent of their government. I don't know if any that are not, well, actually, no, I'm not. On paper, most of them are independent of the government, put it that way. So, yes. I know some of you mentioned Zimbabwe, so not quite sure where they would be. And if there is anyone from Zimbabwe, I'm not in any way making fun of your country. It was just, a few years ago when they had that massive inflation, when hyperinflation, etc. So they made a very good kind of case study for economics of what not to do, of course. So not that important for you to know, just more about the shares. So what is the mission statement of the Reserve Bank? Achievement and maintenance of price stability and financial market stability. So if you had to say what is the main goal, 2 words, price stability. The framework is inflation targeting because that is the instrument they've decided to use. So they use inflation targeting and they want to maintain the price stability. You could say inflation targeting and price stability, obviously kind of the same thing. The inflation target, remember, 3 to 6% of CPI. A bit about the functions, I'm not going to go into detail about that. You can read it in the textbook. I could ask you, name 3 functions of the Reserve Bank as a test question, and you would need to know that. So one of them you already know from yesterday, well, 2 of them you already know from the exercise yesterday that we did. The 2 were a banker to the government, but remember they're not the only banker. So in the old days, long ago, they were the only banker, and the government did not use Standard Bank or First National, any of that, but now the government does. But they still provide banking services to the government. And then monetary policy, very important, which we will do in detail next week. And then the minting, one of the things you did yesterday was the printing of notes and the minting of coins. Nobody else has the authority to do that in South Africa, but some more of their functions. So they control issues of coins and notes. Just as an interesting point, what do you think, I don't know what it is now, but a few years ago, let's say 2009, I need to check now what it is. Which coin do you think was minted the most? Which one did the Reserve Bank have to make a lot of? Okay, you guys are doing random now. You need to have a reason for what you're saying. I had 5 cents, I had 50 cents, and I had a rand. Here, 2 rand. Okay, you say 2 rand? You say? 5 rand? Do you guys want 5 rand? Okay, and you say 50 cents? Why 50 cents? Because 2 rand 50, nice try. So everything is something 50, okay? Somebody said 5 cents as well. Who said 5 cents? Yeah, why did you say 5 cents? I gebruik het vir klein geld. Dis nie die rede nie, maar die 5 cent mint was die meeste gedruk. The 5 cent coin was minted the most, but the reason for that was because people kept throwing it away. Not throwing it away. Think about this. How many people do you know that have a jar, that used to have a jar, maybe a granny or someone, a jar with 5 cent pieces? And the other thing is, consider this. If you drop a 5 rand on the ground, you're probably going to bend to pick it up. But if you drop a 5 cent, who bends down to pick that up? I mean, that's embarrassing. That like really shows desperation. But the point was, so what people were doing is, a lot of times, and say like men who don't have wallets, they just keep the change in their pocket. So they'll get down, they'll take it out, put it on the counter, and the next day when they go out, they're not going to put those 5 cents back in. And so the Reserve Bank had to keep minting more and more 5 cent coins. And there was actually an appeal, please take your 5 cent coins into the bank. However, we no longer, 5 cent coins, 1 cent coins, and 2 cent coins have been discontinued. Why? Anyone like to venture a guess?
We throw them away.
Yeah, aside from the fact we throw them away. Because it costs more to make it than what it's actually worth. So it just wasn't worth it in South Africa. In other countries like America and the UK, you still get 1 penny or 1 pence. But for us, it's just too expensive to make 5 cent, 1 cent, and 2 cents because it's not worth the amount. And then on the board, you see just some more stats about some of our cash. The most demanded note. I'm not going to test you on this. This is just more for your interest. So inflation targeting. This is very important that you get this. So inflation targeting, so the first thing you need to remember is this. The Reserve Bank is responsible for monetary policy. One of my colleagues used to say, if students make a mistake between who does monetary policy and who does fiscal policy, that is a mortal sin. So do it like a sonder. So don't. Fiscal policy we'll deal with in the next chapter. It is the government, national treasury, monetary policy, the Reserve Bank. So I've mentioned it was set in 2000 in South Africa. Who would like to venture? Why not 0? Why would we not aim for an inflation rate of 0? Anyone? What about when we did deflation? I spoke about this a bit when we did deflation. Why would we not aim for 0 inflation? Think about production, think about aggregate demand. If there's going to be growth, or if there's going to be increases in demand, prices must go up. So we expect prices to go up, we just don't want it to be out of control. I've already mentioned the forecasting and the fact that we have a direct numerical target. So there's 3 monetary policy options that a central bank has. They can target inflation like we do, or they can target the exchange rate. Then you would have a fixed exchange rate. Or question?
I think Germany disallows inflation. Why would a country then disallow inflation?
What do you mean by disallow?
They don't allow inflation, so I would assume that means that they're 0%.
That's not possible. How would they disallow inflation?
I'm not sure. It's something I'm vaguely aware.
Check your source and maybe email it to me because I'm not sure where you got it, but you can't, maybe it's just the wrong term. Some people are in the mood for giggling, but anyway, you can't disallow inflation. Maybe it's just another term for inflation targeting. So what they want is they don't want hyperinflation, but they wouldn't put a clamp down on inflation completely. Do you understand? Inflation is going to happen. We expect it to happen. We even kind of want it to happen because there's no way you're going to have increases in demand without increases in prices, specifically aggregate demand. But I'm going to look into it and we can talk about it on Tuesday. I'll just look specifically what Germany's doing and we can discuss it on Tuesday in brief. And then they can also target the money supply, which we don't do, some countries do. So when we talk about targeting the money supply, it means they print a certain amount of notes at any given time. So a few years ago, when the Reserve Bank kept printing, when the Zimbabwean Central Bank kept printing money, you could say they were targeting monetary aggregates. They were targeting the money supply. And again, policy lags require forecasting. So our governor and the Monetary Policy Committee, they're looking what's happening now, and they're trying to predict what's going to happen in December. So when they increase or decrease in interest rate, they're doing it with a view on the future. So I'm not going to go into this. I'll just mention it because I'm putting a video on this online, just so that you know how the Reserve Bank controls inflation. So there are 3 ways that they can do it. The cash reserve requirement, but more about that in the video. Open market transactions. Again, you can see that in the video. And the repurchase rate is also in the video, but I've mentioned that already when I've spoken about the interest rate. So the repurchase rate, also known as the repo rate, is the rate at which commercial banks like Standard Bank, First National, ABSA, borrow from the Reserve Bank. So when they borrow money from the Reserve Bank, it's not interest-free. They have to pay interest. But the interest is lower than the prime rate. What is the prime rate? Anybody? Anybody have an idea? Prime rate, you've seen it? Those of you who've bought on credit, maybe? No, I don't want the exact number. I want the definition. Sorry. Anyone? So the prime rate would be the rate at which a bank like Standard Bank would lend to its good customers, right? Your good average customers. So, but that is linked to the repurchase rate. Why? Because if the repurchase rate goes up, if the Reserve Bank increases the repurchase rate, then obviously the commercial banks are also going to increase their rates because they need to make a profit from what they are actually loaning to you. And then your better clients will get prime -2, maybe your not so good clients might get prime +2, but prime is basically what the bank gives to us, its clients. Okay, and the repo rate is what the Reserve Bank charges its commercial banks. Any questions so far? Questions? Okay, I want to end there, but I'm not going to let you go. I think we can do the solution. Ja, vraag. Kan geld tot de mate wat? Well, you mean counterfeit money? Nee, maar dit is nie wettige geld nie. Zoals jy praat nie van die... Wel, as jy nie weet, is wettig nie, kan jy probeer om te gebruik, maar daar is sekuriteit op die geld, soos wat sê mens vir watermark. So as hulle weet, dis eintlik onwettig. So die antwoord is eintlik nee, dit kan nie, dit mag nie, maar dit gebeur soms. So soms kry ons, dis ook die rede hoekom ons 'n nuwe R200 noot gekry het, want die vorige R200 noot was, hoe sê ons, vulnerable, kwesbaar, nie kwesbaar nie, maar dit was maklik om te, ja, so.
As jy nou spreek, is wat, ek weet hoe ek baie kleiner was, en hulle oor 'n vriende waar ek wat besteed.
Ja? Nee, maar dat is, jy was miskien 'n ouer kind en die winkel-eienaar van jammer vir jou gevoel, so vir jou.
Maar dat klinkt baie klein.
Nee, but I can't hear it. Kind of awesome. You see, I just tell you what he's saying. For those who don't understand Afrikaans. When he was a kid, his older brother would give him, when he was small, would give him money at the Eisenwood. And he would take it to the shop, and the shopkeeper gave him change. I found it hard to believe. I think maybe he was a cute kid, and the shop owner was, maybe the shop owner later phoned his parents and said, you owe me R100, like I used to. So nee, dit is onwettig, en ja, jy kan nie jou eie geld maak nie, maar om dit te beantwoord, geld, as jy nou kyk na die video, geld is eintlik enige iets wat aanvaarbaar is in die algemene publiek. So as ons is nou gemeenskap, hè, en ons besluit nou, ons gaan klippe gebruik as geld. En ons allemaal aanvaard dit, dan is dit ook wat geld. En in die oude dae, baie lang gelede, was klippe gebruik as geld, klippe self enigiets kan geld wees, maar dit moet aanvaarbaar wees by die algemene publiek. Okay.
Sal dit soos 'n negatieve invloed is, dan is dit nog 'n bank.
En nog 'n sentrale bank? Dan kan net een centrale bank wees. So somebody was asking, can there be negative influence if there's another central bank? And the answer is, dis onwettig, verstaan jy? Hulle kry geld die kontant kry van die reservebank. Dat kan net van die reservebank kom. Die geld wat julle by die banke kry, kom vanuit deur die Reservebank. So dis onwettig, hulle mag nie geld self druk of munt te maak nie. So the question was basically if anyone else, it's about this authority thing. And no, other banks cannot print money. All the money that you get comes directly from the Reserve Bank and goes to the banks. Banks, commercial banks are not allowed to print money. And think about it. Think about the chaos we would have if anybody could print money. What would happen to the money? It would lose its value, exactly. It would lose its value. Okay, so I'm going to let you go for now, and I will see you on Tuesday. Those of you listening at home, remember you've got the interview with CLT. They will email you next week. Yes.
I sent